Why do you seem so scared? All I wanted to do was play with you.
Welcome to Terror Tracks, hosted by best-selling horror author Jack Pierce. We publish new episodes every Monday at 2 a.m. EST. Go to terrortracks.com/shop if you would like to support the show, and follow us on social media at terrortracks.com/follow. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everyone. This week we're going to be talking about Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Final Wish, starring Bobcat Goldthwait. Also, in the last episode, we finally escaped Norcastle, and now we're on our way to Demora. But I think we might have to take a little pit stop on the way there and go back in time just a little bit. And soon you will see probably my favorite part of Under a Morning Star, but I won't spoil that yet. We will get to that in the next episode, but it's time to rejoin Rick and Star to see what happens on the train bound for Demora. I'll see you in a moment.
Chapter 12. Midnight at Murphy's. Have you ever been to Demora? I asked. I grew up there. My parents gave me up when I was very young, so I was raised by the head priest at the Temple of Cyrus there, Star said. I wasn't so sure about Demora, or even if any of this was real. The doctor back there shook me up with all that talk about me destroying Norcastle. What if he was right, and all of this was in my head? It all seemed too insane to be real. Well, we have 6 hours to go. Where did you grow up? Star asked. I grew up in Norcastle. After the murders started, we left and moved to Drova. Dad got sick and I joined the military police, I said. How did he die? I'm sorry, that just slipped out. I waved it off. Lung cancer. Marlboro Reds were his vice. Star put her hand on mine. I've seen firsthand the brutality people can bring, in combat and in the police department. Many sights that will never leave me, I said. I know. It'll be all right. I'm here, Star said. We both looked out the window for a while, watching the trees go by. The mountains in the distance were covered with snow, and birds flew south for the winter. Nature was the one thing that helped take my mind off work. I jogged through the parks a lot to clear my head. Plus, I had to keep myself in shape. What was the worst case you had? Star said. That's confidential, I said. Star gripped my hand tighter. No, please, tell me. I won't tell anyone. I promise. All right, I said, ashing my cigarette. Since you can take me into the past, can I take you into mine? I don't know. I've never tried. We can give it a shot. I laced my fingers with stars and focused on my past. My hands began to sweat and my mind raced. All of the bad memories came back to me. I wondered if I should subject her to this horror, but she asked. I felt my mind open entirely, and as I opened my eyes, we were back in Drova. We stood at the intersection of First and Broad Street. I looked around, shocked. It actually worked. We walked for a while, and I grabbed one of the Drova newspapers to see the date. April 9th, 2048. I was working on a case of a serial family murderer. He broke in at night. He used their blood to write cryptic messages on the walls, I said. Star's fingers, still laced with mine, trembled. Her grip tightened as we walked to the police station. No one inside could see or hear us. We walked past all of the officers and went into my office. My former self sat in the chair smoking a cigarette and typing 100 miles per hour on my laptop. There I am, working another 12-hour shift, I said. Sounds rough. I've never had a job like that before. I mean, I've worked at a few restaurants making money under the table when I was younger, Star said. I snickered. What's so funny? If I saw someone that looked like you walk up to give me coffee, I'd probably haul ass out of that store. Goth girls are meant to work at Hot Topic, not Denny's. Star's mouth dropped and she slapped my arm. I didn't wear this stuff to work, you know. I laughed harder. No, I just think it's funny that a little girl like you dressed up in all this gothic shit was a waitress. Did you come out in a dress and apron too? No, I wore regular clothes, she said. Star punched me in the nuts and I fell to the floor. I looked up at Star as she laughed at me. She gave me a swift kick to the side. Get up. I can't keep us here in your memory forever. Jesus, woman, I was just playing. Chill. I stood up and struggled to keep my balance. Once I pulled myself together, we walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out case file number 50321-8. Star opened the file and took her time looking at every single detail. Suspect, Dr. Dennis Murphy, age 42, height 6'1", weight 180 pounds. Charges, 12 counts of first-degree murder. I solved the case, then started having flashbacks about Norcastle. Really messed me up good, I said. I'm sorry, Rick. I needed your help, Star said. I slammed the file cabinet shut. I came to solve the case there, and that's it. Now we're on some kind of crusade to save the world. I don't get paid enough for this. Star teared up, and her voice became shaky. You were the only one who could help. Please, I didn't know what you were going through. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Look, it's all right. I'm a little antsy is all. Star wrapped her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. I was still upset with her. She dragged me out of my life to come be some kind of savior. She needed me, though. I couldn't let someone in need down. That's why I joined the force, to save lives. I thought about the night my best friend Devin died. I was at home relaxing from a long day when Chief Lewis called. Back then, I was just a rookie street cop. This was the only time I ever heard the chief not angry or upset. He told me to head to some address downtown, in the ghetto. As I pulled up, the chief and several officers were there. A couple ambulances parked at the scene as well. Then that unexplainable feeling of emotion hit me when I saw Devin inside this shitty crack house, slumped over on a couch with some dead girl occupying the other half. 2 other guys laid on the floor. He and these 3 people had been shot during a drug deal gone wrong. Devin was always a drug addict, but he was also my best friend since I was 16 years old. It hurt. The last thing he ever said to me was in a message congratulating me on making the force and how he promised he was going to start rehab soon. I kept that answering machine with his voice as a reminder as to why I keep doing this job. Let's get going. I have more to show you, I said. We left the police station and arrived on 1397 East 23rd Street, the Loudons house, the first victims of Murphy's killing spree. We walked through the police tape and up to the 2-story house where Sarah and James Loudon, along with their 2 children, Sam and Jeremy, were all murdered. The house was painted white with red shingles. I was called here around midnight to investigate the crime scene. The bodies were found after the neighbors heard gunshots. I was called in after responding officers found them. They kicked in the door, which muddied the waters in the investigation. I couldn't know for sure how Murphy got inside the house on this one. Before we go in, I have to warn you, it's bad. You don't have to come in if you don't want to, I said. I want to see what happened here, Star said. I opened the door slowly and walked inside. Bloody symbols were painted on every wall. The symbol of Ravel, the god of chaos. Murphy had a sick sense of humor. After he drained the bodies, he decapitated them and left the heads on the couch. A head sat on each couch cushion facing the TV. Another symbol had been painted onto the TV screen, a heart with an X on top of it. The other markings on the walls were in Rami, Remote's native language. The rough translation came out to, Ravel wills it. His followers chanted, thinking it would summon him. The kitchen was burned to a crisp. The empty fire extinguishers left by the door told us he intentionally burned only the kitchen and then put it out before it spread. He wanted people to see his work, his masterpiece. Murphy saw the murders as a magnum opus, a great work that should be admired by all around him. Star came into the living room and became fixated on the symbols. She knelt down by the TV. I've seen this before. Really? I asked. It looks so familiar. What is it? According to the documents analyzed by Dr. Gerard, that the symbol was one of a fictional deity, Ravel, god of chaos and metamorphosis. Metamorphosis? Murphy thought that by killing families, it would please Ravel. He could become a lieutenant in his order. What do you know about Ravel? Ravel is some fictional god created by psychopaths. Murphy was obsessed with this Ravel guy. His M.O. was to leave the symbol at his victims' houses to signal Ravel's return. What causes a man to become like Murphy? Starr said. Systematic abuse, maybe. Sometimes people are just born that way and are late bloomers, as we called them. He seemed normal for most of his life. Top of his class at Oryx Medical School. He was one of the city's most renowned surgeons. He was just a man dedicated to his work. So much so that it may have driven him over the edge. So he just snapped one day? I doubt it. I think he fantasized about it or became fed up with everyday life. He didn't derive enough pleasure out of his daily life, so he would take up destructive activities. Drugs weren't enough, and eliciting prostitutes never satisfied him. We had hours of tape from a time we brought him in on a rape charge. The victim recanted. Then the murders started. So you believe it was over the rape charge? No. I think he had planned it all in advance. Some corpses were defiled. I think he preferred them dead. That way they couldn't call the police. Starr hunched over with her hand over her mouth. She retched, but didn't vomit. She coughed a lot, then recovered soon after. There's more I have to show you. Come on, I said. I led Starr to his second victim's house, the Rochefield residence. This particular one was different. Murphy gave particular attention to this family. It wasn't as messy as the last. It was more calculated and precise. I opened the door and let her inside. The house looked pretty normal. We walked up the stairs and into the bedroom where we found two bodies lying in bed, cuffed to the headboard. They were stitched along the neckline, wrist, groin, and feet. I pulled back the blanket to show Starr. This was his second house. At least that's what we thought. We didn't know the exact order due to this one being a more silent kill. He found the two objectionable. They were swingers. He was against open marriages, so in order to fix them, he surgically operated on them while they were alive and awake. The autopsy report showed that he took out their larynx so they couldn't scream. They felt every incision, and he took his time. What about the children? Starr said with tears in her eyes. He gave them the merciful way out. He poisoned all three when he came to the door dressed as a delivery man. Starr collapsed to her knees and sobbed. Rick, I can't. We have to stop. There's only one place left. It'll bring you joy. I promise. We walked out of the house and through town, arriving at Murphy's mansion on the edge of town. When I realized he was the murderer, I went to arrest him. He wasn't too pleased to see me, obviously. A SWAT team was delayed, and the only way for me to ensure his capture was to go in solo. I snuck around the back door, popped the lock, and found him working on one of his victims. A man that he was about to drain the blood from to use on his next venture. I tried to stop him, but he turned around and lunged at me with a knife. After I got him on the ground, he cut me across the chest and back, and I shot him through the heart twice, I said. You killed someone? Starr asked. It wasn't my proudest moment. It kicked off the Norcastle flashbacks. Dr. Moore thought they all came from viewing an event similar to what happened back there when I was a kid. Regardless of what caused it, it's over now. We have to go back. I'm feeling weak, Starr said.
Welcome back, everyone, to another Are You Afraid of the Dark review. We are starting season 2 proper, and I would love to tell you the great news. We finally have the intro music from Are You Afraid of the Dark and the opening, so I don't have to say it anymore. So yeah, that's one point I never have to talk about again. Now, I'm going to save you about 15 minutes. Do you love Bobcat Goldthwait? If not, I'll see you next week. because this is a Bobcat Goldthwait episode. I think it's the only one he was ever on, and that's going to pretty much determine if you even want to hear about this, episode at all. And I will kind of go over what I think about his performance here through the whole thing, of course, but let's get started because I have like 6 pages of notes. There's a lot going on in this episode. So the episode opens with a trippy Snow White-esque sort of woman that tells you that you have to eat this apple or she will force you to eat it. And I'm just like, you know what? I banged that woman and I'd bang the witch version of her too. You can clean up the witch a little bit. They try to make her look scary, but she's kind of hot. Just, I don't know. I have a thing for goth chicks, I guess. So our main character is named Jill, who wakes up in her bed from a nightmare and thinks that there's something under her bed. She looks under there, and of course there's nothing under there, but when she goes to get a glass of water, she comes back and there's something under there that grabs her. So she runs out of the room and into her parents' room, and they check under the bed, and of course there's still nothing under there. So she must have hallucinated it. It turns out her older brother was actually under there and he was playing a prank on her, but somehow he pulled a Billy Loomis where you didn't really see him coming in or out of the room. That was kind of odd. The next day, Jill goes to the library and she gets a book on the Sandman and other tales, while 2 of her friends eyeball some guy at the copier, talking about how dreamy he is. Throughout the episode so far, they've really been picking on her about how much of a kid she is, even though she's like 14, saying that she shouldn't be reading fairy tales and Mother Goose. It's kind of cringe, really, because, if you're into fairy tales and stuff, that's fine. There's an anime called Fairy Tale that I think a lot of people are into, and, the Brothers Grimm is a huge thing that a lot of people still respect and read. I've never read it, but if that's what you're into, man, it's a lot better than some of the stuff that people are into now, if you think about it. At least they're not into, furries or bronies, and wait until all these kids find out about Rule 34 10 years from the recording of this episode. Yeesh. Can you imagine this episode being released today with all the internet fandoms? The flame war would be incredible, though. So anyway, the girls make fun of her in front of the guy crush because they want her, and she runs off with her books. Fast forward to more exposition from the Midnight Society about how Jill loves fairy tales because they all ended happily ever after, which is not true because the Little Mermaid actually killed herself. Sleeping Beauty ended up with having a child that came from being raped by a prince. Cinderella murdered her stepmother so her dad would marry someone else. These aren't really happily ever afters, I don't think. So we go back to Jill, and she's asleep dreaming about some guy from the library coming to kiss her, and he calls her Sleeping Beauty. One more note before we keep going. Unless the woman you're going to kiss while she's asleep is your wife or your girlfriend, don't do it. Also, don't bring it to their house either. She wakes up to see her brother is wearing a werewolf mask. She screams, he laughs, and then she runs saying that she's going to call her parents about it. But he stops her, and she just gets over it for whatever reason. And she goes and looks out the window, and she wishes upon a star, saying, "Why can't we all live in a world where dreams come true? I wish everyone would just leave me alone." And strangely, outside of her window, it looks a lot like the Starry Night by Van Gogh, which is actually a tapestry that I have behind me, and it's also mentioned in Under a Morning Star. So nice touch, Are You Afraid of the Dark? You have good taste in artwork. It's a very cool painting if you go look it up. It's very expensive. The reason I even got into that painting period was I was writing this museum scene in Under a Morning Star, and I don't know anything about how much paintings cost, and I know the Mona Lisa is probably the most expensive, or maybe the Sistine Chapel or something. And I just typed in expensive painting, and the Starry Night was like 25 million bucks, and I'm just like, that works for me. And it's actually a really neat looking painting anyway, so I got a tapestry of it for like 20 bucks on Amazon. So she goes back to sleep with a metronome that plays forever next to her bed for some reason. That would keep me awake. You just hearing that constant rhythmic click. I don't understand why, but she wakes up again seeing her brother standing over her bed, and she jumps out of bed screaming that she's going to tell her parents, but when she comes back, he's gone. Then she goes back to her parents' room, and they're gone too. Then she goes back to her room and looks under her bed, and Bobcat Goldthwait is there. Oh God. So at this point, this is where you can turn the podcast off and go listen to older episodes or whatever you want to watch or listen to at this point. But if you want to sit and listen to the rest of this episode and see what happens, I warned you, it's going to get very Bobcat. So she screams and he sucks her into this portal where she goes straight to hell. The end. No, seriously, if you like Bobcat Goldthwait, that's the ending. No, seriously, if you don't like Bobcat Goldthwait, that's a great ending. I just made it up for you. But he does suck her into this portal that reminds me a lot of like Cool World. If you remember like the Cool World scene where like our illustrator dude is like falling into Cool World and it's really trippy looking, that's what it looks like to me. So you want to keep going? Let's go. So she wakes up in this trippy world that has like moving gears on the ceiling and dark halls with people floating midair while they sleep, which is an amazing effect actually. You can see the wires on one person, but it's really hard to see. And the way they sort of bob up and down is really neat looking. I don't know how they got that effect exactly. So she meets up with Bobcat and he tells her that he's the Sandman and she's in the land of Nod where everyone goes when they sleep. Eden is actually the proper name if you read my books, but Nod is actually a really good name for the dream world. I might actually steal that for one of the books, so we can have something where it's not in that series. But anyway, also one more side note on my book Bring Me a Dream, there was originally going to be called Mr. Sandman, but it had no Bobcat Goldthwait. So she runs away from Bobcat after he refuses to let her go home, and she goes to this trippy room with different doors that lead to different fairy tales, which just should have been expanded upon. I wish that someone would take this idea and make it bigger. Maybe I'll do it, but it really wouldn't work unless you had the visual to it. So the first door leads to the Queen of Hearts saying off with her head with an axe. The second one leads to the witch from the Pinball Wizard, who I actually had a dream about last night, threatening to cook her like in Hansel and Gretel. I don't know, they use that actress a lot. Maybe she's actually a real witch. I don't know. And she runs back and grabs the Sandman's hourglass and breaks it after Bobcat won't let her go home on her own. The glass breaks and she gets this trippy reverse thing, sort of like being sucked out of Cool World, and she sees a bunch of random scary stuff until she wakes up screaming at her home. The parents run in and everyone's fine. Episode over. It pans over to Bobcat actually writing the final page of her book, which is called The Tale of the Final Wish, and it shows that it was real, and when she went back to sleep, he would haunt her forever. So it's a bad ending. Anyway, final rating. I have a lot to actually say about this one. 6 out of 10. I don't know how you feel about Bobcat Goldthwait, and I think he's probably a really great guy because I've looked him up since then, and he was best friends with Robin Williams, and I heard he's just such a really cool guy, and he was just sort of like a even goofier Robin Williams. So I don't hate this guy as a person, and I don't even mind him anyway. But he's sort of one of those over actors that had that one role and then they turned into their entire career. If you could also compare him to like Christopher Walken or Jeff Goldblum or Gilbert Gottfried, who is actually going to come up later in this series, or countless others, they just play that one part, sort of like Jack Nicholson. He did the same sort of thing where, he always plays Jack Nicholson in every movie, but you love him because he's Jack. But the plot itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The imagery was really, really good, but it just didn't have enough of it. And I felt like this story just had way too much going on in the 2/3 at the beginning to when you get to the good part, it's just not enough of it. It would have been better if they had like an opening 5 minutes and then she gets sucked into this dream world and all sorts of trippy stuff happens. That's what I would have written. But maybe they didn't have the budget to do any more than what they did. But I really think that would be a great movie if you had sort of like, someone gets sucked into the dream world and they go into all these crazy different fairy tales where they're all violent, like, they're off with their head with the Queen of Hearts and having to escape from that. I think that would be awesome if they did like a horror movie sort of thing where they went to all these different fairy tales that were really, really dark. I might actually do that one day. I bet it would sell 1 billion copies if I did, but at the same time, I'm kind of scared of copyright. So I might do that one day. I think I could do that. I did it with Dreamer, kind of, where it was, a guy gets sucked into a dream world and gets stuck there and a bunch of trippy stuff happens. But it's a very simple, direct story with a neat dream element that could be expanded a bit more. I would have loved it if it did. The middle part felt kind of rushed as all. A lot of scenes, should have been cut just so there was more time in the dream world. But overall, it's good, just not legendary. It's a great concept for a much bigger episode. Thank you for listening. That's all I got for you this week. Please follow me on Twitter at JackPierceBooks. And if you'd like to support the show, go to jackpierceproject.com/shop, where we have all sorts of offers. It's not just like a personal shop. It has all sorts of stuff like merchandise and different discounts I got for you. All right. Thank you for listening. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to follow us, go to terrortracks.com/follow. Also, please check out our Patreon, where you can get cool merch, writing lessons, and other awesome rewards starting at $5 a month at patreon.com/terrortracks. See you next week. Goodbye for now.